I don't believe he was acting alone, and more importantly, I don't believe he was the one truly behind it all. He feels more like someone on the outside, watching, waiting, positioned exactly where he needed to be. Because with a reinforced security gate like that at the front door, breaking in isn't just difficult, it's almost impossible. There were no signs of forced entry, no clear breach, and that opens up a far more disturbing possibility that someone never needed to break in at all. For 47 days, the same question has echoed, haunting investigators and gripping the public. What really happened to Nancy Guthrie? And as each day passes, the answers don't become clearer. They only grow darker. How did the masked suspect on her front porch actually get inside? The doorbell footage places him there in the early hours of February 1st, 2026, head down, gloves on, backpack secured, a holster visible at his hip. We've replayed those moments over and over, studying every movement, every second he lingered at that door, trying to understand how an 84-year-old woman's home could be entered so silently. No noise, no alarm, no signs of forced entry, no damage left behind. Every theory has been considered: picked lock, hidden key, an unlocked window, or the possibility that Nancy, without her hearing aids, simply never heard a thing. But what if all of those questions have been leading us in the wrong direction? Because there's one detail, always visible, always present, yet somehow overlooked, that changes everything about that night. A detail captured in the footage, seen in every image of her home, and familiar to anyone living in the Southwest. Nancy Guthrie's front door wasn't just a door. It was protected by a security gate. This wasn't just a front door with a lock and a camera. It was reinforced with a metal security gate, iron mesh, a solid steel frame. The kind designed to stop intruders cold. The kind you don't break through quietly, or quickly, or without leaving clear damage. Yet when investigators arrived, there was none. A neighbor, just 4 houses away, who has the exact same gate, made it clear. There is no realistic scenario where the man seen on that porch forced his way in. Not in under an hour. Not without tools visible on camera. Not without noise that would have woken the entire neighborhood. Which leads to a chilling conclusion. That door wasn't broken open. It was opened from the inside. This shift changes everything. No accusations. No arrests. The family has been officially cleared. But the question now becomes unavoidable. If forced entry was nearly impossible, then how did he get in? And the answer investigators and experts keep circling back to is the same. Someone let him in. And Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, vanished from her home in Tucson's Catalina foothills in the early hours of February 1st, 2026, a place she had called home for more than 50 years, raising her children after losing her husband decades earlier. And now, what once looked like a break-in may have been something far more deliberate. And Nancy Guthrie lived a quiet, structured life, one built on routine, familiarity, and trust. Every Sunday, she was at the same church. She knew her neighbors. She chose to live alone in her $1 million home, tucked deep behind desert landscaping, where distance and privacy defined the neighborhood. But behind that independence, there were limits. At 84, her mobility was severely restricted. She couldn't walk even 50 yards on her own. Her life depended on precision, daily heart medication, morning and night, and a pacemaker synced to her phone, tracking every beat in real time. And every night, before sleep, she removed her hearing aids. In that silence, she would hear nothing. Not a door. Not footsteps. Not a voice calling her name. On January 31st, 2026, her evening followed a familiar pattern. An Uber took her to her daughter Annie's home for dinner, arriving just after 5:30 p.m. The night was warm, ordinary, filled with conversation, laughter, and routine family moments. Then, around 9:50 p.m., someone drove her home. The garage door opened, then closed. Nancy was back inside. She was home. She was alone. And by all appearances, she was safe. Everything in Nancy Guthrie's home was exactly where it should have been. Her medication set out, her hearing aids resting on the nightstand, her phone beside them. Nothing disturbed. Nothing missing. For nearly 14 hours, no one checked in. No calls. No messages. No one stopping by to make sure the 84-year-old woman with a fragile heart had taken her medication and was safe in bed. As she wasn't reported missing because someone sensed danger. She was reported missing because of something far more subtle. A routine broken. At 11:56 a.m. on February 1st, a friend from church called her daughter Annie. Nancy hadn't shown up for her weekly virtual service. That had never happened before. Annie drove over. She searched every room, every corner of the property. Her phone was there. Her keys. Her wallet. Her car still in the garage. Everything was in place. Except Nancy. At 12:03 p.m., the family called 911. By then, whatever had happened was already long over. According to confirmed timelines from Sheriff Chris Nanos, FBI statements, and official sources, at 1:47 a.m., the Nest doorbell camera at Nancy's front entrance was suddenly disabled. And that's when the night truly changed. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed on February 5th that the doorbell camera wasn't lost to a glitch or a dead battery. Investigators refused to explain how, but they made one thing clear: it was taken offline intentionally. Someone physically disabled it. Before anything else happened. At 2:12 a.m., motion was detected on the property, but no footage exists. The camera was already down. Then at 2:28 a.m., something even more chilling occurred. Nancy's pacemaker lost connection with her phone. The device hadn't moved. It was still on her nightstand. Which means Nancy had. Former FBI official Andrew McCabe explained it simply. When that connection drops, it's usually because of distance. Limited range. Once it breaks, the person is no longer there. Nancy wasn't in that house anymore. She was being moved. 8 minutes later, at 2:36 a.m., a neighbor's camera nearly 2.5 miles away captured a vehicle passing through the area. The drive from Nancy's home takes about 6 minutes. The timing fits almost perfectly, leaving only a narrow gap. Just enough time for someone to steady themselves, check the road, and disappear into the dark with something, or someone, in the back. The camera that captured the passing vehicle wasn't even within the official search zone. Authorities had drawn a 2-mile perimeter, but this home sat beyond it. Investigators never asked for that footage. The neighbors came forward on their own, after recognizing the timestamp from news reports. A critical piece of evidence. Almost missed. And when deputies arrived at Nancy's home hours later, they found blood, on the porch, on the door, in the driveway. DNA confirmed it was hers. But it wasn't chaos. It wasn't a struggle scattered across the ground. According to former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell, the pattern told a very specific story. Droplets falling straight down, from a fixed height. No footprints. No smears. No drag marks. Her conclusion was chilling and precise. Nancy wasn't walking. She wasn't resisting. She was wrapped, likely in a sheet or blanket, and carried out through her own front door. Behind the scenes, investigators pushed further. Over 10 days, working with Google engineers, the FBI managed to recover fragments of footage from the Nest system. Data never meant to be saved, buried deep in back-end storage. Because under normal conditions, without a cloud subscription, that footage should have been gone. But somehow, pieces of that night remained. And normally, once a camera is disabled, everything it captured disappears with it. But in this case, Google engineers managed to recover fragments, residual data briefly transmitted before the system went dark. After 10 days of analysis, those fragments revealed the now infamous images seen across national news. A masked figure on Nancy Guthrie's porch, moving with unsettling confidence. There was no hesitation. No nervous scanning. He walked straight to the camera, like he already knew where it was. He tapped the lens, twice. Then covered it using leaves from a nearby plant, methodical, controlled. This wasn't panic. This was preparation. The FBI described the suspect as a male, around 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches, average build, fully covered, dressed in dark clothing, wearing black gloves, carrying a 25L Ozark Trail backpack. with a holster on his right hip, and possibly a tattoo visible at the wrist. But one detail stood out even more. Images of him without the backpack were captured on a different day. He had been there before. Not by accident. Not passing through. He came to study the house, to test the approach, to confirm the plan. And when you look again at the front entrance, visible in every photo released, you start to notice the one feature that changes everything. What stood in front of Nancy Guthrie's door wasn't decoration, it was a true security barrier. A steel-framed gate with iron mesh, bolted into the structure itself, built to withstand force, weather, and intrusion. The kind of protection designed not to look strong, but to be strong. These gates are common across the Southwest, especially in places like Arizona, engineered with a simple purpose: buy time, create noise, and make forced entry nearly impossible without tools. They swing outward, lock into place with a deadbolt, and allow homeowners to open their main door safely while keeping a solid barrier between them and anyone outside. That's why one neighbor, Laura, who has the exact same gate, immediately recognized something others missed. When she saw the footage of the masked man standing at Nancy's entrance, her reaction was instant and certain. "You're not breaking into that gate. Not quietly. Not quickly. Not without leaving evidence behind." And that realization reframes everything. Because if he wasn't trying to break in, then why was he there? Laura wasn't guessing. She was describing how these gates actually work. Forcing one open would require tools like bolt cutters or a pry bar, time to apply pressure, and enough noise to alert anyone nearby. It wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be silent. And it certainly wouldn't go unnoticed on a front porch with a camera and neighbors within earshot. But the man in the footage had none of that. No tools. No equipment. His hands, gloved but visible, were empty, except for the leaves he used to cover the camera. He didn't move like someone preparing to break through steel. He moved like someone who didn't need to. And when investigators examined the scene hours later, the gate told the same story. No damage. No cuts. No bent frame. No signs of forced entry at all. Which leads to a far more unsettling possibility. He didn't come through that door by force. Laura's conclusion is simple, but chilling. He was waiting. Not to break in, but for someone inside to open it. Laura's reasoning is grounded in something simple. With a gate like that, you're not getting in by force. So when you watch the footage again, the suspect's behavior starts to feel different. He isn't pulling on the gate. He isn't testing the lock. He's just standing there, head down, waiting. And then there's another detail. Nancy's front entrance has glass panels on both sides. If the inner door was open, someone outside could see in through the mesh. If it was closed or dark inside, visibility would be limited. Laura believes the man wasn't trying to break in. He was trying to look in, to check, to confirm, to see if everything inside was ready. Her theory goes further, and it's unsettling. What if someone was already inside? An accomplice. Someone preparing to bring Nancy out, while the man outside waited for the door to open so he could help. In that scenario, the entry didn't happen at the door that night. It happened earlier. Through trust. Through familiarity. Through someone Nancy would have let in without hesitation. And Nancy was known as warm, trusting. The kind of person who would open her door to someone familiar without hesitation. After decades in the same neighborhood, danger wasn't something she expected. Which raises a critical possibility. The person inside didn't break in. They were let in. Or they already had access, keys, familiarity, knowledge of her routines. However it happened, they were inside before Nancy went to bed. Likely sometime after she returned home around 9:50 p.m. And then, they waited. Quietly. Patiently. Hours passing, making sure she was asleep, making sure the house and the neighborhood was silent. At 1:47 a.m., the camera goes dark. Not destroyed, but deliberately disabled. A calculated move, meant to erase visibility in that exact moment. Then, sometime before 2:28 a.m., someone else arrives at the front door. This wasn't random. It was coordinated. The person inside opens the gate, opens the door, and together, they begin moving Nancy from inside the house toward the entrance. As she wasn't dragged. She was wrapped, carefully, likely to contain the blood from whatever had already happened. Then she was carried out, placed into a vehicle, and gone. Minutes later, that vehicle appears on a neighbor's camera miles away. The timeline aligns too closely to ignore. This isn't speculation built from imagination. It's a scenario shaped by evidence. No damage to the security gate. No forced entry at the door. A 41-minute window between the camera going dark and the pacemaker signal disappearing, suggesting controlled, deliberate movement inside the home. Not panic. Not chaos. Precision. Even the blood tells the same story. Droplets falling straight down, untouched by footprints, undisturbed by dragging. Consistent with someone being lifted, not pulled. Moved slowly, carefully, by more than one person. And then there's the physical reality. Moving an elderly woman who cannot walk on her own isn't easy. It takes effort, coordination, strength. As Laura, who cared for her own mother, explained, helping someone even lighter up a few steps is difficult in normal conditions. Now imagine doing that, in silence, in the dark, under pressure, which leads to a conclusion that's hard to ignore. This was not the work of one person. For one person to carry a 150-pound woman, someone with limited mobility, possibly unconscious or resisting, out of a house, down steps, across a driveway, and into a vehicle, without noise, without dropping her, without leaving clear traces, would be incredibly difficult. But for two people working together, it becomes possible. And that's where everything shifts. If one person was already inside, with access to the gate and the door, then the footage we've been analyzing isn't about a break-in at all. It's about timing, coordination, execution. The man on the porch wasn't forcing his way in. He was waiting to be let in. And the evidence begins to align. A prior visit, confirmed by multiple major outlets, shows the same suspect at the door on a different day, without the backpack. Not an attack. A walkthrough. A quiet assessment of the property, the camera, the layout, confirming details likely provided by someone who already knew the inside. Because this didn't start that night. It started earlier, with planning, with access, and with someone on the inside. If the suspect had inside help, someone who understood the gate, the camera, Nancy's routine, then that earlier visit takes on a new meaning. It wasn't random. It was confirmation. Because seeing it in person, how the gate opens, where to stand, what the camera covers, is knowledge you can't fully get from description alone. That visit wasn't curiosity. It was preparation. Which means this wasn't impulsive. It was planned. And if someone on the inside was feeding information, that moment at the door was the final check before everything moved forward. Then there's the camera. It was disabled from the outside, but in a way that suggests inside knowledge. At 1:47 a.m., it goes offline. The suspect clearly believed that action would erase everything. He was wrong, but the attempt shows intent and awareness. Because Nancy's camera didn't have a cloud subscription, something you wouldn't know just by looking at it. From the outside, it appears like any other system. But someone who had been inside, someone familiar with how it worked, would understand that targeting the device itself could stop it from recording in that moment. And that detail points in one direction. This wasn't just someone approaching the house. It was someone who already knew it. If there was inside help, then the suspect may have acted on information he believed was reliable. Like the idea that disabling the camera at 1:47 a.m. would erase everything that followed. It didn't. But the attempt itself shows planning and guidance. Then there's the absence of forced entry. No damage to the security gate. No broken door. No shattered windows. None of the signs you would expect if someone forced their way in. And that absence matters, because it narrows the possibilities. An entry had to come from access. A key. An unlocked door. Or someone opening it from the inside. But each of those paths leads to the same place. Prior knowledge. Knowing which doors might be unsecured. Knowing her routine. Knowing when she would be asleep. And then there's the timeline. 41 minutes between the camera going dark and the pacemaker losing signal. If this was one person acting alone, that window would require near-perfect execution. Entering quietly, navigating an unfamiliar home in darkness, locating Nancy's bedroom, all without a sound. That's not just difficult. It's unlikely, unless someone already knew exactly where to go. In that 41-minute window, everything had to happen. Entering the home, finding Nancy, subduing her if she woke, possibly searching the house, then wrapping her, lifting her, and moving her out without noise. For one person, that's not just difficult, it's dangerously slow. Every extra minute increases the risk of being heard, seen, or making a mistake. And most intruders move fast. In and out. But 41 minutes tells a different story. It suggests control, not chaos. And that's where the theory shifts again. If two people were involved, one already inside, one joining after the camera went dark, then that time frame starts to make sense. It becomes the time needed to coordinate, to move carefully, to contain the situation without creating more evidence. Wrapping her, lifting her, carrying her out without dropping her, placing her into a vehicle, checking the scene, making sure nothing was left behind. That's not panic. That's a process. And processes like that are rarely done alone. A single intruder would be rushing. But the evidence suggests something slower, more controlled. The blood pattern, analyzed by a former FBI expert, shows droplets falling straight down. No footprints, no smears, no drag marks. That's not movement across the ground. That's someone being carried. And carrying a 150-pound woman, possibly unconscious or resisting, is no small task. Even under normal conditions, it requires strength and balance. In silence, in the dark, under pressure, it becomes far more difficult for one person alone. But with two people, everything changes. One at the shoulders, one at the legs. Moving together, adjusting weight, minimizing noise, maintaining control. What is risky for one becomes manageable for two. The blood pattern alone doesn't prove there were two, but it fits. And when you combine it with everything else, the untouched security gate, the missing signs of forced entry, the precise timeline, the knowledge required to disable the camera, a clearer picture begins to form. Not chaos, not improvisation, but coordination. Then investigators asked a question that shifted the timeline in a way the public hadn't seen before. January 24th. A date never previously linked to the case, until now. Laura revealed that FBI agents sat with her, reviewing footage from that exact day, searching frame by frame. January 24th, just 8 days before Nancy vanished. And not just any day, a Saturday. That's when the pattern begins to emerge. January 11th, also a Saturday. February 1st, the day Nancy disappeared, again, a Saturday. 3 dates. Same day of the week. Increasing focus. If the suspect had a regular weekday schedule, Saturdays would offer the perfect window, time to move, to observe, to plan, without raising suspicion. And now, it appears investigators believe it started earlier than anyone realized. January 11th may have been the first visit, the moment the suspect came to study the house. Long before the night everything changed. He didn't just appear that night. He came before, walking up to the door, studying the camera, examining the security gate, confirming details he likely already knew. Then he returned again on January 24th. Nothing obvious was captured, but that doesn't mean nothing happened. Other cameras, other angles. What once looked ordinary may now carry a different weight. And then February 1st. The same man, this time with gloves, a backpack, and a plan. 3 Saturdays. 3 visits. Each one refining the approach, narrowing the timing, confirming vulnerability. This wasn't chance. This wasn't impulse. This was preparation, methodical, patient, deliberate. Someone invested time into this. And people don't take that kind of risk without reason, or without information. Which raises the question, who gave him that confidence? Because one final detail suggests something even more calculated. Investigators asked Laura if her internet went down that night. Not a casual question. A targeted one. The kind you ask when you suspect the operation didn't just involve a person, but control over the environment itself. If internet service in the area was intentionally disrupted before 1:47 a.m., it could explain some of the most puzzling gaps in this case. Nancy's phone, left on her nightstand, never transmitted any trackable movement after she was taken. It simply went silent. Normally, smartphones constantly update their location through Wi-Fi and cellular networks. But if her home Wi-Fi dropped at the same time cellular signals were weakened or blocked, the phone would freeze at its last known location, her house, and stop sending any data. No signals. No trail. It could also explain why nearby security cameras captured so little. Many home systems rely on internet connections to upload footage. If that connection was down during the critical window, cameras may have recorded nothing to the cloud, or nothing usable at all. Which means the suspect may not have just controlled the timing, but the environment itself. It could also explain why the doorbell camera failed to upload anything in real time. Instead, investigators had to recover fragments, residual data buried in back-end systems, because the device wasn't connected when it mattered most. If the internet was down, the camera couldn't transmit, even if it was still functioning. But access doesn't begin and end with family. It extends to those who had legitimate reasons to be inside the home: service workers, contractors, maintenance crews, anyone who had been there before, who understood the layout, the systems, the routines. Because in a case like this, access isn't random. It's earned. Access to Nancy's home didn't have to come from someone close in a traditional sense. It could come from routine. Delivery drivers who visited often. Rideshare drivers who picked her up or dropped her off. Anyone who saw the inside of that house, even briefly, could begin to understand her habits. Add to that service workers, cleaners, landscapers, maintenance crews, or even neighbors who had been inside before. These are all people with legitimate access and potential insight. And every one of those connections can be traced through service logs, employment records, phone data, and movement patterns on key dates. Investigators can map who was nearby on January 11th, January 24th, and February 1st. They can identify who returned, who lingered, who didn't belong. And according to former FBI analyst Jennifer Coffindaffer, the most likely scenario involves insider knowledge leaking outward. Not necessarily direct involvement, but information passed along. Details about the home, the routine, the vulnerabilities. Because sometimes, the person who opens the door to a crime isn't the one who walks through it. Coffindaffer has been clear about one thing: the person who shared inside details may never have intended for any harm to come to Nancy. In the normal course of conversation, small pieces of information can slip out. A routine mentioned, a vulnerability observed, an elderly woman living alone, with limited mobility, a predictable schedule. Details that seem harmless in the moment. Those details could have been repeated to a friend, an associate, someone listening more carefully than they should have. Over time, those fragments form a picture. And for the wrong person, that picture becomes opportunity. But if the security gate theory is accurate, if entry required access from the inside, then this goes beyond careless words. It points to someone who didn't just share information, but acted on it. Because being inside that house that night, opening the gate, coordinating with someone outside, helping move Nancy, requires intent. It requires a decision to cross a line. And that's where the focus tightens. This isn't about someone who talked too much. It's about someone who participated. Someone with a motive strong enough, financial pressure, personal grievance, or even coercion, to step from knowledge into action. The evidence is beginning to align in one direction. No forced entry, a controlled timeline, familiarity with the security system, even the possibility of disrupted connectivity. And all of it points to the same conclusion. This wasn't just planned from the outside. It was enabled from within. On March 13th, just days before Laura's interview aired, Sheriff Chris Nanos made a statement that shifted the tone of the entire case. When asked a direct question, could this person strike again? His answer was immediate and unmistakable: absolutely. That word carries weight. Because up until that moment, the message had been cautious, focused on leads, on hope, on the possibility that Nancy could still be alive. But this was different. This was an acknowledgement of ongoing risk. And yet, in the same breath, he introduced uncertainty. We believe it was targeted, but we're not really sure. Targeted, but not certain. A statement that raises more questions than it answers. Because what does targeted actually mean? Laura, like many others, began to break that down. Was Nancy chosen because of her wealth? Her age? The fact that she lived alone in a secluded home? Or was it something more specific, something personal, that hasn't been revealed? If the targeting was based on traits she shared with others in that neighborhood, elderly, independent, financially stable, living in homes set back from the street, then the implications are far more serious. Because that means Nancy may not have been unique. She may have been one of many. If the targeting was personal, based on Nancy Guthrie's specific routine, her habits, her vulnerabilities, then the threat may be limited. But if it was broader, based on characteristics shared by others in that community, then the risk extends far beyond one home. And right now, investigators don't know which it is. That uncertainty is what's driving fear across the Catalina foothills. Neighbors are rethinking everything. Installing cameras, reinforcing locks, questioning who they let onto their property, verifying identities that once would have been trusted without hesitation. Laura has already changed how she approaches her own security. She won't say how, and that silence says enough. Because once you reveal your defenses, they stop being defenses. Others have followed. More cameras, new locks, neighborhood watch groups, quiet systems of checking in on one another. A community that once felt insulated now feels exposed. And it all traces back to one statement: absolutely, this person could strike again. Whether that fear is justified depends on what investigators know and what they haven't said yet. Because 47 days later, Nancy Guthrie is still missing. And behind the scenes, the scale of the investigation continues to grow. Hundreds of personnel, federal resources, advanced forensic teams, all focused on one question that still has no answer. What really happened that night? Behind the scenes, investigators are using some of the most advanced forensic tools available, and one of them has already changed the course of cold cases across decades. Investigative genetic genealogy, the same method that helped identify the Golden State Killer and rapidly link a suspect in the Idaho student murders, is now being applied to DNA recovered from Nancy Guthrie's property. This technology doesn't require a criminal record. It doesn't rely on someone being in a law enforcement database. It only takes a single distant relative, someone who uploaded their DNA to a public genealogy service. From there, analysts can build a family tree and follow it forward until it leads to a name. At the same time, the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey team is mapping digital movement across key dates: January 11th, January 24th, February 1st. They're not just looking for presence. They're looking for patterns. Devices that appear more than once. Phones that return. Phones that were there during reconnaissance, and again on the night Nancy disappeared. Because phones leave traces. Signals bouncing off towers. Connections logged by carriers. Movement that can be reconstructed minute by minute. And when those patterns begin to align with timelines, with locations, with known access points, they start pointing somewhere very specific. And then there's the network inside the house itself. Router logs. Hidden signals. Every smartphone constantly sends out probe requests, searching for familiar Wi-Fi networks, even when not connected. Those signals can be captured, analyzed, and tied back to devices that were present, even briefly. Which means that even if someone thought they left no trace, the technology may be telling a different story. Every device that came within range of Nancy Guthrie's router that night may have left something behind. a digital trace. Unlike DNA, which can take time to process, this kind of forensic analysis moves fast. If an unfamiliar phone was inside that house, even for minutes, there's a strong chance investigators will see it. And at the same time, they're following the physical trail. The backpack seen in the footage, a 25L Ozark trail model, isn't just a random item. It can be tracked. Shipment records, store distribution, purchase histories. If it was bought with a card instead of cash, that transaction could point directly to a name. The same applies to the holster. Identified as a specific brand and type, it gives investigators another path. Gun shops, sales logs, recent buyers. They're already checking photos, names, cross-referencing records. Each piece on its own may seem small, but together, they form a network of evidence. Digital, physical, behavioral. And networks like that don't stay hidden forever. The search for Nancy Guthrie has expanded far beyond Arizona. Billboards carrying her image and a $1.2 million reward now stand across multiple states. Sightings have come in from Texas, Southern California, Nevada. Each one investigated, each one a possibility. Because right now, no one knows where she was taken or where she might be. But behind the scenes, the investigation is moving forward. The science is working. Evidence is being processed. Patterns are forming. And if the security gate theory holds, investigators are narrowing in on something critical. Someone who had access to Nancy's home long before that night. For 50 years, that house was part of a life built on trust. Nancy raised her children there. She knew her neighbors. She followed routines that never changed. In a place like that, a knock on the door wasn't a threat, it was familiarity. And that's what makes this different. Because whoever did this didn't just break into a house. They stepped into a life that trusted them. The security gate was always there, visible in every photo, every video, every report. A barrier designed to keep danger out. And yet, somehow, it didn't. For weeks, that security gate was visible to everyone, but understood by almost no one outside the investigation. It took Laura's explanation to reveal what it truly meant. Not decoration, not a minor detail, but a barrier that changes the entire story. Because once you understand how that gate works, how difficult it is to force, how loud it would be, how much damage it would leave behind, you start to see the footage differently. The man on that porch wasn't trying to break in. He was waiting. Waiting for someone on the inside to open the gate and let him in. And that realization shifts everything. Because that person, the one who had access, who opened that door, who made entry possible, is still out there. The FBI is looking for them. The evidence is pointing toward them. And a $1.2 million reward stands for the information that can identify them and bring Nancy home. 47 days. No arrests. No charges. No answers. But the pieces are tightening. The timeline is fixed. The evidence is consistent. The technology is working. A DNA is being processed. Cell data is being mapped. Digital traces are being uncovered. And somewhere within it all, between the disabled camera, the silent 41-minute window, the untouched security gate, and the blood left behind, the truth is already there, awaiting to be found. There is a name behind this, and someone, somewhere, knows it. If you have any information connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI tip line. The reward now stands at $1.2 million, offered for the information that leads to answers. If you've ever worked at her home, delivered packages, provided services in the Catalina foothills, or noticed anything unusual on the weekends of January 11th, January 24th, or February 1st, no detail is too small. What seemed insignificant then could be critical now. If someone you know spoke about a wealthy elderly woman living alone, showed interest in that neighborhood without explanation, or asked questions that didn't feel right in hindsight, say something. If you remember a sale, a backpack, a moment that didn't sit right at the time, trust that instinct. Every transaction, every interaction, Every memory matters. Because this case is built on pieces. And one piece, just one, can change everything. The investigation is active. Every tip is reviewed. Every lead is followed. And as this story continues to unfold, the truth is getting closer. Nancy Guthrie deserves to be found. Her family deserves answers. And the person who opened that door that night already knows them.